Welcome to our valedictory session of our conference, Asia on the Move, Histories of Mobility and the Making of Asia. We're greatly privileged to have as the valedictory speaker, Dr. Karan Singh. The President IIC, Shri Shyam Saran, will preside. Before handing over to the chair, I request the Chief Rapporteur to sum up the conference for a valedictory speaker. Just 2 lines of introduction. Dr. Prasun Chatterjee is Deputy Head Academic, Primus Books. He holds a PhD in History on Travel and Description in 17th Century India and has written on gender, travel, writing, and the circulation of goods in early modern India.
Good evening, honorable dignitaries, Dr. Karan Singh, Shri Shyam Saranji, Shri K.N. Srivastavji, respected scholars here, and my friends. The last 2.5 days have been really quite a journey through landscapes, mountains, seas, and across time and space. So summing this up would be an arduous task because there were so many papers, fascinating ones, and I'll try to be brief, but please forgive me if I miss out on balancing them. The conference started with a wonderful exhibition on the traveling relics, and that showcases the theme of mobility in Asia, which the conference tries to capture. On 23rd morning in the inaugural session, Shri K.N. Srivastavji welcomed the delegates and mentioned, among other things, how Kapilaji had thought about interactions among cultures and the theme of mobility. Dr. Sudha Gopalakrishnan then outlined how Dr. Karan Singh also inspired this project about Asia and mobility within that, and how the Samhita project is also kind of trying to explore that. Shri Shyam Saranji also talked about something interesting, whether there could be an Asian personality that one could think of, and that kind of reverberated through the papers later. In the keynote address, as we get to know so much from Professor Sanjay Subramaniam's books and papers, here also he opened up a window to a wide range of issues that could be looked at through a comparison of ports and their morphology from Malacca to Hormuz to Surat to Fort St. George to Kochi. So it was a wide-ranging talk, and it focused on certain points which are crucial while looking at port cities and their mobile communities. Urban morphology, types of port cities, the differences between Surat and Bandar Abbas, ethnicity and mobility, ethnogenesis, the question of cosmopolitanism. So all of this led to the first session presided over by Dr. Alok Tripathi, and where Dr. William Dalrymple talked about the journey of the influences of art from Berenic to Ajanta, and he focused on a certain argument which is going to become more interesting about the Roman-Egyptian influence and connection rather than the Greek one in that is evident in the Gandhar objects that have been found near the Red Sea port of Berenic. So and from there, the wide range of discussions that he introduced us to, including a very interesting map of the concentration of the Roman coins, which showed very clearly how the concentration is more towards the subcontinent and the peninsular part of it rather than towards China, which is something for people to think about, scholars to research on in times to come. This session on hubs of interaction also led to several discussions on shifting boundaries, topologies, and the place of river ports as well. These were there in the question and answer session. That led us afterwards to the second session on journeys of texts, ideas, and beliefs, presided over by Professor Upinder Singh. Here, Dr. Sudha Gopalakrishnan started the first presentation and explored the transference of texts through by explaining first the stories, the story of Sudhana in the text Gandavyu, and then went on to describe the way the text has traveled to China, Japan, and is also seen in the form of panels in the Borobudur temple in Indonesia. Professor Sashibala then talked about the journey of Atisha and first his training and the way he prepared for a journey of correction of Tibetan Buddhism, and how he traveled with the ideas and texts of Dharmakriti. This was a very old 1500-year route that he followed, and the travails of that journey. Professor Batar Kitimov then traced the very interesting connection of the travel of Buddhism through China into the Bohai state in Russia in the 9th century, and then a second wave of Buddhism, where the nomadic Oirat or Kalmyk tribes in the 17th century carried the message of Buddhism onto Russia. And these were very interesting influences to follow, and they led to certain discussions and connections later in the presentations and observations of other scholars here. The third session yesterday was again a fascinating one on stories of travel and encounter, presided over by Professor Nayan Chanda. It focused on travel narratives and texts and several observations about the authors, travelers, their expressions and ability to tell stories, the veracity of their narratives, the ways of looking at the subjects of description in authority. These were some of the topics which were explored. Professor Nadim Rezavi deliberated on the unique features of Al-Biruni's account in the first presentation, where he pointed out that it was perhaps one of the first objective accounts of India as a whole, as the subcontinent. Also, he outlined the role of Al-Biruni being a political prisoner, and that leading to the way he looked at India and the various aspects of the landscape. The other very interesting point that he delineated was that the sciences, the knowledge about sciences is what Al-Biruni does better, but when it comes to the social systems, he was being prodded by the people who were around him and was advising him. Then we had a very interesting presentation by Professor Syed Akhtar Hussain, who reflected on the beautiful prose of Ibn Battuta, the elite circle in which he traveled, and he talked about Muhammad bin Tughlaq's Sultanate and Ibn Battuta's observations on it, and then he went on to describe in very interesting terms how Bengal comes up in the descriptions, and Sadgaon in the descriptions of Ibn Battuta. Two things which he delineated there were very interesting. First, that it was perhaps one of the first documents for Muslim rulers in the Middle East of today, bridging the various parts of Asia that Ibn Battuta's account achieved. The other thing was that there was actually perhaps no pride or degrading of others while looking at the differences in cultures. Professor, the next presentation by Professor Ronald D'Souza on the peregrine cam or peregrine cow was fascinating because of the kind of fantastic and moving tales that he talked about, from robbery to adventures across mountains and seas, and also this account of Fernão Pinto brings together certain aspects which are now becoming important: travel writing, empire mapping, Portuguese cultural understanding of Asia, and the wide range of ways in which this account is being read, from him being called a liar to the popularity of the accounts and the authorial sort of voice and the interpolations in it, that are the different versions of it that perhaps come to account. And this reminds me of the accusations on Nicola Manucci as well, much later. So insights into maritime history, interactions between Europe and Asia, and the aspect of the Jesuits, and the question regarding Francis Xavier's place in history and in other problematic questions, actually were very interesting to follow. Then Professor Zlatan Wilhelm explored the arduous journey of Choma de Coros and the significance of his study of the Tibetan texts, from Choma's formative influences of the Uyghur connection being discussed rather than the Magyar sort of origins, to the inspiration from the professors in Göttingen, to his travels to Leh, and through that to the Zangla citadel in 1824, and finally his arrival in Kolkata and writing the first Tibetan dictionary and grammar, what all of these meant. So that was again a fascinating paper, bringing together many aspects. Today morning we started with the fourth session, which was on individual enterprise and comparative cultures, and the papers were really stellar, presided over by Ambassador Jayant Prasad. Professor Nayan Chanda told us the fascinating tale of Abraham bin Yezu and his travel from Tunisia to Mangalore and the becoming of an international businessman, in quotes. It's a very modern term, but the various range of social and especially I was struck by the descriptions of the shipments, and more so the bronze workshops and other materials that you talked about. So, so the different worlds of 12th, 13th century Asia were getting connected in this manner, and it was really good to know about this. Professor Dilorom Karamat then outlined the different ways in which the musical traditions and instruments of Iran, India, and Central Asia have been borrowed and journeyed back and forth between these various territories and their cultures. The exchanges that were more vigorous, according to her, of the with Central Asia before 16th century, and were overtaken by a prominence of the Mughal era exchanges with Iran, still continued in certain ways, and then the interactions with Afghanistan during the colonial period, along with the earlier tradition of pre-colonial era, led to the contemporary understanding of shared musical traditions in these areas. She actually talked about it till the 20th century, which was really interesting. Then we went, we had our fifth session on changing landscapes and expanding imaginaries, which was chaired by Professor Wariku, and it explored the mobility and exchanges theory of the medium of art. So, Professor, through the medium of art, I'm sorry. Professor Navina Najat Haidar's explanation of Farooq Beg or Farooq Hussain through the paintings and through his travels, the identification of the character who is spread across as 3 or 4 names was really quite almost like a piece of detective work, which is coming together through the work of scholars over 70 years. But Robert Skelton's initial hunch and the subsequent studies have now led to this interesting connection that I think is not just between art, but also it is between different regions in poetry, because I heard at Madison a few months back that scholars are working on the poetry of Zahuri and poetry of Faizi, and the interesting connections between that. So all of these somehow seem to me related, but will have to be worked out perhaps. Professor Robert Linroth's presentation took us through the travels of Zadpa Dorje from the Zanskar mountains to Bhutan and back to Zanskar. It was really interesting to know how some of these unique murals in monasteries of Ladakh were painted, and how the differences in the depiction of, let's say, the elephant, which was quite alien to people earlier in these areas, were sort of brought through the experiences of someone like Zedpa and his journeys and his understanding of the plains and other parts of Asia. Professor Irina Zeronsko, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing wrongly, but delved on Rorich's worldview through his paintings and through his travels. Rorich's belief that Altai and Himalayas were the core of human civilization and is quite an inspiring thought in certain ways, but his art, travel, and writing create a complex of arriving at what could be one way of looking at an Asian personality that perhaps Shri Shyam Saranji was talking about. The last session on interactions renewed, chaired by Professor Siddiq Wahid, had again really fascinating papers from both the side of commerce and trade, and on the other side from religious identities and deliberations on them. And Professor Anita Sengupta spoke about how we can rethink the way the term diasporas have been talked about. So her query began with looking at how Bukhara does not have an Indian community in that sense, but there are mentions of the Multanis, Khatris, Shikarpuris, and then she went on to tell us about the connection of Shikarpur with the Central Asian lands, and also the historical transitions of when the Silk Route was sort of in. There was almost a rivalry between how the Silk Route would function and later how the maritime route took over, but the Silk Route perhaps reconfigured itself, or there were other kinds of interactions of trade, and those come up in the later discussions. Dr. Janet Rizvi's work on the Pashmina shawl is very well known, and she here told us that there were many other communities which were of good value to the Yarkandi route to Central Asia, and the connection of Ladakh and Kashmir to that. Apart from that, we then had Professor Gitanjali Surendran talking about a Buddhist bay. We only knew in parts about these connections, but they came together so well in this presentation about how India, Burma, Ceylon in the first half of the 20th century exchanged Buddhist ideas, and then the role of Angarika Dharmapala and the Mahabodhi Society in bringing these elements together of the connections of Buddhism all across the subcontinent, and then several Indian intellectuals traveling through these parts of the subcontinent, including Ambedkar's travels to the 6th Buddhist Council and the other political implications of his conversion towards the end. That paper actually brought together politics, religion, and the aspect of of pilgrimage into one whole complex. Dr. Maya Joshi's exploration of the various influences on the interesting and enigmatic character of Rahul Sankrityayan was stellar in its expanse in terms of looking at the contribution of Rahul Sankrityayan to Buddhist literature, archiving material, his accounts of travels, of his travels, and the many changing stances and associations. It's really difficult to encapsulate Rahul Sankrityayan in one category, and how the alternate frames, lists of names, his range of writings can be thought about. One would look forward to her work in time regarding this. So this was more or less the conference and the papers. It was really good to be part of it, and I really enjoyed. Thank you.
Wow.
So thank you so much, Prasun, for summing up over 2 days of discussion on over 2 millennia of interaction. So we'll hand over to our chair. Since we're short on time, I'll just say that Shri Shyam Saran, present IIC, is former Foreign Secretary of India, was Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Nuclear Affairs and Climate Change, and his books include How India Sees the World, How China Sees India and the World, and the edited volume on cultural and civilizational links between India and Southeast Asia.
Thank you very much, Niharika. Let me first of all thank Prasun for that excellent summation that he has given of our 2-day conference. But it is a special pleasure for me to welcome Dr. Karan Singh, whose association with the India International Center is, of course, of very, very long standing. He also happens to be the chairman of the editorial committee, which brings out the very, very well-received IIC quarterly, very highly regarded. And more than that, the International Research Division, which has really been instrumental in putting this conference together. It is actually Dr. Karan Singh who initiated this whole program of looking at the Asian space in all its different aspects, and it is later on that it became an international relations, international division, from being much more focused on the Asian side. Since then, Dr. Karan Singh, of course, has been always very, very, supportive of all the various projects that we have been undertaking. And as I said, it is a special privilege for me to welcome him amongst us. Let me say that Dr. Karan Singh, of course, he's the symbol of Jammu and Kashmir. For 18 years, he was the regent, Sadr-e Riyasat of Jammu and Kashmir. But much more than that, he really, is a kind of a living example of the very rich legacy of Kashmir and Kashmiri culture. Here is a region which connects our Indian subcontinent to Central Asia, to Tibet, and its own culture is such a wonderful, delightful mix of so many influences that we really in India are very, very proud about. Dr. Karan Singh, of course, I don't need to go into his bio. I think all of you are aware of his background. He has been cabinet minister in government. He has been an author of many books. He is a Sanskritist. He is someone who has in the India-International Center recited Sanskrit shlokas, but also pieces from other languages. So he's really a polymath. And I think we could find no better person to really, conclude this very fascinating 2 days of discussion we have had. Perhaps Dr. Karan Singh is the best person to really talk about this subject. When I went to him to invite him to be the speaker for the valedictory session, he asked me what this is all about. And so I was foolish enough to say that, we are going to be talking about this Asian space and the kind of, there is an Asian personality, there is some kind of an Asian identity. And he challenged me on that and said, is this really the case? I would hope that after he has heard about all that we have been through, perhaps we will now have his judgment on this particular question. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Shyamji. Shyam, Saran and Shri Vastava, the Rapporteur, Sudha Gopal Krishnan. First of all, let me congratulate you all for having brought together such